How Danielle healed from growing up without a father, more than reality. Real Story, EP 1. The first time Danielle realized she was different, she was 5 years old. It wasn't in a dramatic moment, not the kind you see in movies with sad music playing in the background. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sun was filtering through the cheap lace curtains in her grandmother's living room. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by crayons and coloring books, trying to stay within the lines of a princess's dress. There was a knock on the door, and her friend from next door burst in, her pigtails flying. The friend was holding a lopsided birthday card, the kind made of construction paper and too much glue. It was for her dad. Danielle remembers looking up from her drawing and asking, "Is your daddy having a birthday?" Her friend nodded, beaming. "Yeah, we're having a barbecue for him this weekend. My mom bought a cake with a fishing pole on it because he loves fishing. What do you do for your daddy's birthday?" Danielle felt a strange tightness in her chest, a feeling that she would later learn to name as the gap. It was the feeling of trying to find a shape in a puzzle box but realizing the piece you were looking for didn't exist. She looked at her grandmother, who was busy in the kitchen. She looked back at her friend. She didn't want to admit that she didn't have a daddy to give a card to. She didn't want to say that her daddy was a ghost, a name whispered in arguments, a face in an old photograph that was hidden in a shoebox at the top of her mother's closet.
So, she lied.
It was a small lie, a 5-year-old's desperate attempt to belong. "I'm making him a card too. He's just away. He has a big job." Danielle's mother, a woman who worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the roof over their heads, was a warrior. She was a woman of steel and love, but she was also a woman of silence when it came to her ex-husband. The questions Danielle asked, the "why doesn't he live with us?" and "does he miss me?" were met with a tight smile and a change of subject. "We don't need him, sweetie. We have each other." That was her mother's mantra. It was meant to be a shield, a way to protect Danielle from the pain of rejection. But to a child, it felt like a secret, a forbidden topic that held the key to her own identity. Growing up without a father wasn't just about the big things. It wasn't just about the empty seat at the school play or the side of the bleachers at the soccer game that remained vacant. It was the small, mundane moments that carved out the deepest wounds. It was the quiet panic in the hardware store when she was 10, trying to buy a hammer for a school project and realizing she didn't know the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. She remembered a neighbor's dad helping them, laughing, and she felt a sharp pang of envy. It was the cruel question from a boy in her middle school class, "Is your dad in jail?" and the eruption of laughter that followed. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. The shame was instant and absolute. She built a world around the absence. She created a fantasy. Her father wasn't just a drifter who had left when she was a baby.
No.
In her mind, he was a spy. He was a secret agent, a hero who had to leave to protect them, and one day, he would return, a knight in a trench coat, to sweep them off their feet. She would spend hours looking out the window, imagining a black car pulling up and a handsome man stepping out, carrying a stuffed animal for her and roses for her mother. This fantasy was her shield, the coping mechanism that allowed her to get through the days. It was a beautiful lie she told herself because the truth was too ugly to look at. By the time Danielle hit her teenage years, the fantasy of the spy father had faded. The longing had curdled into a bitter sort of resentment. She didn't just miss the man she never knew, she hated the idea of him. She hated what his absence had done to her mother. She hated the way her mother would sometimes stare off into space, a distant look in her eyes, as if she were watching a film only she could see. She hated the financial strain, the constant moving, the ramen noodle dinners that felt like a reminder of their broken family. She saw her father as the architect of all their problems. This is when Danielle began to build the second wall. This one was made of steel and defiance. She adopted a persona of fierce independence. She didn't need anyone. She certainly didn't need a father. She was a one-woman army. She got a job at the local grocery store at 15, stacking shelves and bagging groceries. She gave the money to her mom, but she kept a little for herself. It was about control. It was about proving to the world, and to the ghost of her father, that she could survive without him. She was a better man than he ever was. But here's the cruel trick of growing up without a father, especially when you're a young woman. The archetype of a father shapes your understanding of all men. It is your first blueprint for how a man should treat you, how he should protect you, how he should love you. And when that blueprint is blank, or worse, when it shows you a blueprint for an abandoned building, you have no idea how to build your own relationships. You're just guessing. Danielle's first serious boyfriend was a boy named Mark. He was loud, charismatic, and had a temper. It was a fiery, passionate relationship. They broke up 3 times a week and got back together twice. He was jealous, possessive, and dramatic. To Danielle, this felt like love. It felt passionate because it was volatile. It felt like he cared because he wanted to control where she went. She had no frame of reference for what a healthy, steady, secure love looked like. The chaotic, anxious feeling of being with Mark was familiar. It was a twisted echo of the chaos and anxiety she felt at home, waiting for a father who never came. Her subconscious was trying to recreate her childhood dynamic, trying to win the love of an unreliable man. It was trying to heal the wound by reopening it over and over again. When that relationship inevitably imploded, she moved to the opposite extreme. She chose a man named David. David was safe. He was reliable. He was so safe and reliable that he was practically invisible. He didn't challenge her. He didn't excite her. He didn't make her feel anything at all. He was a placeholder. She was with him for 2 years, and during that time, she felt a profound, crushing loneliness. Being with him felt almost lonelier than being alone because it confirmed her deepest fear, that she wasn't worthy of a passionate, overwhelming love. She was worthy of being tolerated. She was worthy of a man who was just filling time. The relationship ended quietly, with little more than a whimper and a text message. It was in her mid-20s, after a particularly disastrous string of relationships, that Danielle hit a wall. She wasn't just hurting anymore. She was exhausted. She was tired of the anxiety, tired of the distrust, tired of the way her body would tense up whenever a man raised his voice, even in jest. A friend suggested therapy. Danielle was resistant at first. Therapy was for people who were broken, and she had spent her entire life building a self-image of a strong, independent woman who had triumphed over her circumstances. To go to therapy was to admit that she hadn't triumphed. It was to admit that she was still bleeding. But she went. The therapist, a calm, older woman named Dr. Evans, didn't try to fix her. She simply asked her questions. The first few sessions were a monologue, a bitter tirade about her father, about her mother, about how her life was unfair. Dr. Evans just listened. Then, one day, she said something that shook Danielle to her core. "You talk a lot about your father's absence," Dr. Evans said softly, "but you never talk about his presence. You talk about him as if he's a ghost who only exists in the past. But he exists in your present, Danielle. He exists in every decision you make. He exists in the way you hold your shoulders, the way you don't let people get close, the way you apologize for taking up space. He exists in the men you choose. He exists in you." Danielle was furious. She had spent years trying to exorcise this man from her life, and now a therapist was telling her he was living inside her? "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I don't think about him at all. I'm over it." "That's the point," Dr. Evans replied. "You're not over it. You've just built a fortress around it. And that fortress is getting smaller and smaller. You are living in a house with no windows, Danielle. You can't see the world for what it is. All you can see is the shadows on the wall." That session was the turning point. For the first time, Danielle realized that healing wasn't about forgetting her father. It wasn't about pretending he didn't exist. It was about acknowledging his existence and deciding what to do with the pain it caused. She had to walk into the house of her memories, open the closet, take out that shoebox, and look at the man in the photograph. She had to stop seeing him as a mythical villain or a forgotten hero and start seeing him as a human being. She asked her mother about him. It was a difficult conversation, one that happened over a cup of tea in the same grandmother's kitchen where the initial lie was born. Her mother was hesitant, her jaw tight, but Danielle persisted. She learned the truth. Her father wasn't a spy. He wasn't in jail. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who, for the first few years of her life, tried. He held her. He played with her. He sang to her. But he was a man with his own deep, unhealed wounds. He grew up in a house of silence, where love was conditional and strength was measured in anger. He didn't know how to be a man, let alone a father. He didn't know how to handle the pressure of a family. He didn't know how to handle the responsibility.
So he ran.
He ran because he was scared. He ran because he was weak. He didn't leave because Danielle wasn't enough. He left because he didn't think he was enough. This was perhaps the most freeing realization. Danielle had spent her whole life thinking the absence was a reflection of her worth. She wasn't lovable enough, not interesting enough, not good enough to make a man stay. But the truth was far simpler. Her father's departure had nothing to do with her. It was a tragedy, but it was his tragedy. She had just been living in the ruins of it. The true work of healing, the real grit of the therapy, wasn't just in understanding her father. It was in forgiving him. And this, Danielle will tell you, was the hardest thing she has ever done in her life. It felt like a betrayal of her mother. It felt like letting him off the hook. Forgiving him felt like she was saying, "It's okay that you hurt me," and it was not okay. But Dr. Evans explained it differently. Forgiveness, she said, is not about him. It is a gift you give yourself. It's not about saying what he did was okay. It's about saying, "What you did to me is going to stop controlling me now. I'm taking my power back. I am no longer going to let the ghost of you dictate the woman I am becoming." To help with this process, Dr. Evans gave Danielle a homework assignment. A terrifying one. She was to write a letter to her father. She wasn't going to send it, but she had to write it, by hand, as a way of purging the poison. Danielle put it off for weeks. The blank page was a monster. What do you say to a ghost? How do you address a void? Finally, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, she sat down and began to write. The first draft was furious. The pages were soaked with tears and venom. She screamed at him on the paper. She wrote about the empty seat in the bleachers. She wrote about the jealousy of seeing girls with their dads at the mall. She wrote about the shame, the fear, the confusion. She wrote for hours until her hand cramped and the page was a mess of angry scribbles. Then she took a deep breath. She turned to the next page. And she started to write the letter she had never known was there. She wrote about the life she had built. She wrote about the job she got, the apartment she rented, the friends who loved her. She wrote about the resilience she had learned, the strength she had discovered, the woman she had become. She wrote about her mother, the true warrior in her life. And finally, she wrote about the pain. She wrote that she was angry and she was sad and she was tired. She wrote that she wished he had been there to teach her how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to recognize a liar by the look in his eye. But she also wrote that she was grateful. Not grateful for his absence, but grateful for the lessons that absence had taught her. It taught her to be self-sufficient. It taught her the value of kindness. It taught her that a person is not defined by the love they missed, but by the love they choose to give. The closing line of the letter was a simple one. It was the single most profound statement of her entire journey. "I don't need you to be my father anymore," she wrote. "I have filled that role myself. I am my own protector. I am my own guide. I am my own source of strength. I hope you are healing, too.
Goodbye."
When she finished, she didn't burn the letter or tear it up like they did in the movies. She folded it carefully and put it in the shoebox with a photograph. It wasn't about destroying the past. It was about accepting it. She had written her truth, and in doing so, had drawn a line in the sand. She was no longer a little girl waiting for a hero. She was a woman who had learned to rescue herself. The process of healing from fatherlessness is a paradox. Danielle discovered that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It is not a one-time event. There is no finish line where you cross and suddenly you're cured. It's more like a spiral. You return to the same feelings over and over again, but each time you are at a slightly higher vantage point. You can see it more clearly, and the pain is a little less sharp. Even after writing the letter, there were triggers. A father walking a bride down the aisle at a friend's wedding. A scene in a movie where a father tells his son he's proud of him. A commercial for Father's Day. In the past, these moments would have sent her into a spiral of self-pity and rage. Now, she allows herself to feel the twinge. She acknowledges the sadness. She gives herself a moment to grieve the childhood she didn't have. But then she lets it go. She doesn't cling to the sadness like a security blanket anymore. She doesn't let it define her day or her self-worth. She feels it and she moves on. One of the biggest breakthroughs happened on a date. She was having dinner with a man named Eric. He was a good man, kind and steady. They were talking about their childhoods, and he was telling a story about his father teaching him how to ride a bike. Danielle watched him talk, and she realized she wasn't jealous. She wasn't angry. She was just present. She was listening to a man tell a story about his life, and it didn't feel like a personal slight. In fact, she was happy for him. She saw the joy in his eyes, and she shared it. It was a small moment, but it was monumental. It was the first time in her life that a positive story about a father didn't feel like a knife in her ribs. She had stopped measuring her life against a yardstick that didn't belong to her. This is the secret that Danielle learned, the one she wants to share with anyone who is struggling with the same wound. The healing didn't come from finding a father figure to replace the one she lost. It came from accepting the loss. It came from realizing that she was an artist, and the canvas of her life was a masterpiece, not because of what was painted on it, but because of the spaces left empty. Those empty spaces, the gaps, were not flaws. They were the negative space that gave shape to her strength. What does it look like to live with the healing? For Danielle, it is a quiet, internal peace. She still doesn't have a relationship with her biological father. He reached out once, a few years ago, a tentative email that felt awkward and foreign. She replied politely, but she didn't feel the need to pursue a relationship. The little girl inside her no longer needed him. The woman she had become had already built her own family. She had built a community of friends, mentors, and colleagues who poured into her. She had created a support system that was real and present, not based on obligation, but on mutual love and respect. She is more compassionate now. She looks at her mother with new eyes. For years, she was angry at her mother for not letting her have a father. But now, she sees a young woman who had her heart broken, who struggled to survive, who did the best she could with the resources she had. Danielle sees the strength in her mother's silence. She sees the love in the way her mother saved her from a life of chaos. She sees the sacrifice. The most profound change, however, is in her romantic relationships. Danielle is now married to a man named Ben. He is steady, supportive, and incredibly present. He is not a project for her to fix, nor is he a mystery for her to solve. He is a partner. He is a true partner. He knows about her past, and he understands her triggers. When she gets anxious, he doesn't run away or get angry. He sits with her. He holds her. He assures her that he is not going anywhere. He is teaching her, through his love, that a man can be a safe harbor. He doesn't try to be her father. He doesn't even need to be her father. He is just her husband. And he is the best thing that ever happened to her. When she thinks about having her own children one day, she doesn't feel fear. She feels a sense of determination. She doesn't know exactly what it means to be a parent, but she knows exactly what it means to be loved, and she knows what it means to feel unseen. She will make sure her children are seen. She will make sure they are heard. She will teach her sons how to be men by showing them what it means to be vulnerable, to be empathetic, and to show up. And she will teach her daughters to never wait for a man to tell them they are worthy, because they will already know. Danielle often reflects on the little girl who lied about her father on that sunny Tuesday afternoon. She feels a deep, aching love for that child. That child was so scared, so confused, trying to navigate a world she didn't understand. Danielle wants to reach back in time and tell her, "You don't have to lie. You don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to pretend to be whole. Your broken pieces are beautiful. You're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay." Sometimes, people ask Danielle if she thinks the absence of her father has made her a stronger person. She used to hate this question because it romanticized her pain. But now, she understands the nuance. She doesn't think her pain was a gift. It was a tragedy. It was a trauma. It left scars that she will carry for the rest of her life. But she also understands that the way she chose to respond to that trauma shaped her character. The fire didn't make the steel stronger. The steel was already strong. The fire just burned away the impurities. She teaches a workshop for young women who have grown up without fathers. In this workshop, she talks about the fatal attraction. It's the unconscious drive to attract men who are emotionally unavailable.